Hero balance in Overwatch 2 has been a pretty controversial topic of conversation recently, especially among the higher echelons of ranked play. Supports, you'll hear some argue, are too overpowered, with some going as far to say that at the higher levels, tank and DPS roles feel more cosmetic than anything else, due to the sheer amount of value a good support player can provide to a team. So is the state of Overwatch 2 supports too broken to be left alone? Well, like a lot of things in Overwatch, it depends on who you main. Heroes like Illari on release show that a lot of issues that people have with support heroes seem to actually lie with the raw numbers that most of the heroes actually have. Illari came out with what was honestly a bit of a ridiculous kit. The raw healing output that she was capable of at release was astonishingly high, with a turret that was doing most of the healing anyway, which allowed Illari players to run house and carry a game, easily climbing to have the highest damage and healing in a lobby. Combine her with basically any competent second support, and it was safe to assume that you wouldn't lose a teammate unless they decided to go on a pilgrimage to the enemy backline and lose a 1v5. You're out there, you know who you are, stop it. And this is where the big issue with supports lies in Overwatch. The fact that there are two of them that both can do such a large amount of healing, and that with both supports focusing on one target, it can render some heroes practically unkillable. Now, the obvious answer is clearly to get good and target down your enemy supports, but that doesn't always work out, and we're after a bit more nuance here. So where do the supports sit on the old power scale, and can they be considered truly balanced when they carry so much utility? There are some supports in Overwatch that we can definitely consider to be perfectly balanced, or even weak due to how strong some of the others actually are. Now, when thinking of balanced heroes, the first one that comes to our mind is actually one that many love to complain about, and that's Mercy. She's easy for beginners to play, and with an exceptionally high skill ceiling due to how her movement works, a good Mercy player will make themselves known in any lobby if they're given the chance. She doesn't have value handed to her by pressing a single button. Game knowledge and knowing where to place herself is the key to getting the most from her kit. Plus, she also basically has to sit next to a teammate at all times in order to get the most out of her healing and damage beam. So you'll have a decent idea of where she is once you see the beam effect on someone, and that makes her a relatively easy target to hunt down. Unless the Mercy player has god tier movement, which, to be fair, makes it a skill ceiling. Now obviously she's not perfect, her damage boost could use a tweak or two in the future to help heroes like Pharah, Ashe and Sojourn become less oppressive while receiving the blue beam, but apart from that, her kit looks perfectly fine. Even her Resurrect is all good due to the fact that she quite often has to walk into no man's land and potential sightlines of the enemy and face down a trip back to spawn if she wants to bring back a teammate, and it also uses the potential lack of awareness from the enemy team to bring someone back without them realising, so again, it falls within the skill ceiling. Mercy's balanced, okay? I'm sick of having this argument. Alright, so there's some good, let's get into some of the bad. Oh, hey Moira. It pains me to say this, you have to understand I'm a Moira main, but it's true. She's good with a team comp that can rush forward and stay clumped together, but at the same time, there are heroes like Bap that can do her job 1,000 times better. She's almost like the antithesis of Mercy, where she's easy to pick up for beginners, but her healing is more limited, while spreading across an entire team at once, not just one player. And if we're honest, her utility leaves a lot to be desired. It'd be nice if you could do a little bit more than simply heal or deal damage at long range with her orbs. Her damage orb is usually the target of complaints, people complaining that they can be taken out from across the map with zero intention from the Moira that threw it. And usually I'd just say, well, sucks to suck, but I'm trying to stay impartial. There is an element of luck to her damage orb, and the devs have tried to tweak it in the past, but to no avail just yet. Her kit really needs to change in a way that allows her to lean further into becoming a leeching support, allowing her to gain some sort of amplified value from actively dealing damage instead of simply doing damage to heal for longer amounts of time. Then again, this also does pose the risk of alienating some of the players that actually play her, i.e. me, like what happened with the Orisa rework, so the best case scenario would be to make her kit require slightly more activity during a game instead of just sitting back with the team and throwing orbs out. If Sombra can get a rework, then so can Moira. Back to the Balance Brigade, and next would be Brigitte. Now, she was the recipient of a rework to her ultimate in Season 4, which now allows her to stun with her shield bash while in rally, and also giving her a wider shield with 750 health alongside it. I'll be the first to admit that hearing that she could stun with her shield bash again brought some real scary flashbacks to early 2018 for those of us who played Overwatch back during the GOATS meta, but this iteration of the stun is definitely a lot tamer compared to those times. The fact that she can only stun while in rally now means that she can only do it twice during the time frame of the ultimate, which is absolutely nothing compared to the hellish state that she released in 5 years ago. The changes she's received during Overwatch 2 have put her in a state where she is somewhat situational, where she isn't an amazing pick overall, but will thrive in certain comps, which is really where we want every hero to be, not just supports. On to another one, and Lifeweaver is in a bit of a strange spot because, oddly, overall his kit is pretty powerful. It's just he's weak to heroes that can quickly close the distance between him and his team. Now at launch, it was near enough insulting to play Lifeweaver in a game with how atrociously bad his kit was. A sign of disrespect to your team and a surefire sign you were actively throwing. Low amounts of healing, trivial amounts of damage that would make Mercy look capable of being a DPS, and an ultimate that was actually more efficient at blocking doorways than it was at healing his team. Thankfully though, he is now in a spot where he has an immensely large healing output, while also being weak to things like dive compositions, leaving his reliability up to the coordination of the enemy team. It's true that in places like the Overwatch League and other areas of pro play, he wouldn't see much value outside the spawn doors and giving Widowmaker a platform to possibly get an earlier limb from, but in your general matchmaking games, you'd see a solid amount of success due to the lack of coordination in comparison to a more organised environment. Again, situational use and counterable. Isn't that the game for everyone? Lucio is also in a bit of a strange spot because he hasn't ever been a must pick for any reason other than his speed boost. The utility that he provides with this is without equal. It is always useful to go faster than your opponents, and no one else in the support roster can even get close to providing anything like it. The issue with Lucio, as with many of the other supports, lies with which other support hero you pair him with, but I'm getting ahead of myself, put a pin in that, we'll get back to it later. Moving on to some of the more unbalanced heroes, Baptiste is one that has recently seen plenty of play in the Overwatch League across playoffs. His high amounts of healing, high damage and overall survivability puts him in a spot where he can do the jobs of both a support and DPS hero at the same time, but it's his immortality field that we want to draw the eye to. While it's annoying that it can keep people alive, that is its basic use, so we're not going to get too far into that, but a fair criticism of the ability comes with its cooldown. It's only at 23 seconds, which combined with the healing output that can come from Baptiste and someone like a Brig or a Lucio, means there's always a chance that you'd be able to keep your team from dying not only once, but twice during a fight. If Mercy can bring one teammate back from death once every 30 seconds, then why should Bap be allowed to just let his entire team remain in a fight actively doing something on a shorter cooldown? I'm not saying it needs nerfing into the ground, I'm just saying questions need to be asked, considering how much flack Mercy takes around here. Now, while we're on the topic of immortality, let's speak briefly on Kiriko. Her Protection Suzu at release had one of the most needlessly inflated collections of effects for no real reason at all. Cleansing negative debuffs, giving 1 full second of invulnerability, giving 50 healing, knocking people back, unpopular opinion or not, an ability as potent as that should never have so many moving parts attached to it. Which is why it's been toned down very fairly over time, but a hero shouldn't really release with an ability that stacked, even if the developers want them in a state to be played a lot at release. Although to be fair, they maybe went a bit too far the other way on that with Lifeweaver. As a support that is more than capable of taking duels and being able to properly defend themselves with their kit, they should have to at least take some sort of risk while looking to keep their teammates alive. A hero that has been granted extra power to do this in Overwatch 2 though is Zenyatta, a hero that really should be something close to a glass cannon type of character, an extremely high damage output and a HP pool that can be blown away by a soft breeze. In Overwatch 2, he was granted the Snap Kick passive ability to help himself stay alive, and while, yes, it probably seems like a great idea for those who play as him, it is kind of inconsistent when you look at the other knockback abilities shared across the support role. Lucio has his Soundwave, an ability that knocks enemies back, but the passive from Zenyatta seems to be more reliable at sending enemies back, while also not being on a cooldown, and it doesn't feel great to play against while trying to play close to him as a tank especially. Pairing it with his Orb of Discord, keeping enemies at range while also letting his entire team deal an extra 25% damage to them, is one of the most unfun combinations of abilities to play against, especially as the heroes with larger health pools. So with all that, hopefully you get a general idea of where we're going with this. The current state of the support role in Overwatch is at a point where healing, survivability and cooldowns are so immensely strong that certain pairings of support heroes are able to keep their teammates alive with comfortable amounts of health, even at the worst possible times. And there is a glaring issue when such a large chunk of the support roster can deal so much damage that they fundamentally break the role when they're as good at both healing and damage dealing that it makes some of the DPS picks questionable, especially when you consider that a DPS hero can really only deal damage outside of a few niche cases, and support can do that while keeping the team alive. High healing, high survivability, and the ability to do consistent damage leaves them in a tough spot. No one's saying they shouldn't be able to defend themselves, they absolutely should. But it's hard to argue that a fair few heroes are almost quote-unquote broken when you consider their relation to the DPS role. It's almost worth asking, what's the point in even having roles when one of them can do the job of another so effectively? The switch to 5v5 hasn't helped, taking an off-tank off the lineup, which essentially removed one of the cats that supports have to herd during games, definitely makes the support's job easier, but that works both ways. So I'm not sure that all the people calling for a return to 6v6 are actually truly thinking about it that much. So how do you solve a problem like supports? Well, ultimately, seems like you kinda don't. For one thing, the amount of balance updates that come through during a season could do with an increase to see what can be done against the ever-growing amount of support prominence in the game. The devil works hard, and I don't doubt the Overwatch 2 balance team works a lot harder, but expediting some of the reworks and tweaks we've had in recent updates might have alleviated problems before they really became one. Worse still, we know the experimental card is something that still exists within Overwatch 2, but it's been left to gather dust, and it hasn't been touched since its predecessor, which really makes you wonder what is actually planned for the mode and whether the devs actually see it as a useful tool that they can take advantage of. At its core, it's a space to implement balance changes without fully committing to them, which, let's face it, the game could do with. It's something that should have been used a fair few times in the past year of Overwatch 2 already, but it hasn't for whatever reason, and as a result, questionable balance changes and criticism and pushback across social media, the Overwatch forums, and even in-game chat has been pretty prevalent. Balancing the entire support roster and role to an entirely new way to play the game was obviously always going to take time, but as we close in on Season 7 and with 1 year of Overwatch 2 under our belts, that excuse has kind of run its course. So how do you solve a problem like supports? You might start by getting all of Overwatch 2's clerics singing from the same hymn sheet.